the New York Times is almost unreadable now. They're woke. They did bow to the resistance journalists inside their ranks. And I find the paper almost unreadable and insufferable.
To get Brexit.
Make America great again.
No.
Hello, this is Stephen Edgington for The Sun, and today I'm interviewing Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly is an internationally acclaimed broadcaster and journalist. She worked for Fox News for over a decade and then NBC. She has now launched her own podcast, which is doing fantastically well. We're going to be talking all about the US election and the media landscape in America. Thank you, Megyn, for joining us, and happy belated birthday.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Is it time for Trump voters to unify behind the president? I know that the Democrats are talking about this idea of unifying and healing in the country at the moment.
Look, unity is not going to happen. It's dreamy, sure. I'd love to see it on the big screen in a movie, but in real life, it's not going to happen. I just had a debate this morning with James Carville saying, okay, you want to do unity? Let me speak on behalf of a Republican voter, any random Republican voter who would say, great, I'm pro-life. Will you unify behind me on my pro-life platform and say that abortion is murder and we should ban it? I mean, no, right? Like the two sides have diametrically opposed views on everything from fracking and the future of oil to abortion, to taxes, to wokeness. They're not going to unite. And for Joe Biden to have pronounced it done, we are united, we are healed upon his victory speech, while a nice aspiration was not realistic.
I want to focus in on the media for a large part of this interview because you've got such fantastic expertise and experience in this industry. You know a lot of journalists, you've worked for the media for a long time. Do you think that ultimately they understand, and I'm going to use they, the vast majority of them, understand Republican voters?
God, no. They don't understand him and they don't really desire to. They understand enough that they feel they can judge. That's all they really need. And honestly, this is what's so frustrating to me as a journalist is that I have been a registered Democrat, I've been a registered Republican, and I've been a registered independent for the vast majority of my adult life. So I understand, I can see both sides. I really have made an effort to understand both sides. It doesn't really require much more than that. If you just take your own personal opinions out of it, it's not that hard to cover the news objectively. But what we've seen in the past 5 to 10 years is a change in journalism and journalists to almost entirely opinion journalism, where you try to advance your worldview without disclosing to the audience that that's what you're doing. So it's just, that's racist, period. Without explaining, what about it is racist? Like, let's talk about it. No, Trump's racist and his supporters are racist and it's because they just are and they're part of the Klan, as Ilhan Omar just said. It isn't objective and it isn't truthful. And I think their need to sort of elevate their own selves, these journalists, the media, really hampers them in connecting with the half of the country, right? That's why they all go to Fox or online, which is the only other place you can hear journalism or commentary that's not all left-leaning.
And where does this stem from? I mean, you've obviously mentioned their egoism. Is it just because they've got very large, a lot of these people in Washington, DC and New York and LA, they've got very large egos?
Well, I think a lot of television people have egos, but a lot of journalists do too, print journalists as well. I think a lot of it comes from most of these organizations are looking for graduates from elite universities, institutions who take themselves very seriously and have never spent any time in flyover country or knowing, people who have. And they go into these journalism institutions and they're surrounded by like-minded people, whereas I grew up a Democrat, but then I worked for a big law firm that had a lot of corporations employing a lot of people that had some thoughts about how to run a business and what kind of environment was good for running businesses and hiring people. Then I went to Fox News for 13 and a half years, a company run by Roger Ailes at the time, who had been a ditch digger in Ohio and ran the company like he was a ditch digger in Ohio, just connected to the mentality of regular folks who get ignored by the mainstream. And that really is what's been the magic of Fox News' success. It's not Republican talking points. It was always the ability to understand what's important to the other half of the country. So you cover the same stories, but you don't go in with the same disdain for the Republicans listening, or with the same biases against the subject matter.
Well, this is perhaps why so many people, and I think I can include you in this category, find the idea of unity and healing rather bizarre from these people, who, as you say, they come from, and I think the same is it's the same in the UK, where you have a very sort of, you have this clique, this cartel of people who went to the same universities, who grew up in the same cities, and now they're lecturing us on, or lecturing the American people on unifying and healing, when perhaps those journalists have been decrying Trump voters as racist and things like that for the last 4 or 5 years.
Absolutely right. They only want unity because they won. They weren't crying for unity when Trump was the president, which he still is. You know what I mean? They weren't saying, let's all get unified because it just feels good to be unified. What the end of that sentence is, let's unify around Joe Biden's agenda. And that's just not going to happen. And frankly, what's happening here and in the UK is very similar when it comes to this cancel culture wokeism. And you tell me whether, I don't know a Republican who's in favor of this. And frankly, I don't know a center left person who's in favor of this nonsense. It's a leftist thing. Normal liberals here in the United States hate cancel culture. They're not in favor of it. But it's become dominant because they're the loudest voices, and they're so into shaming the rest of the world for not agreeing with them. You don't agree with them and you're a sexist, or you're a racist, or you're a xenophobe, or you're a transphobe, and that has a way of shutting people up. But how are we going to unite around that? It's like, so you want my kid to be kicked out of the university because he took the wrong position on Black Lives Matter? We're not going to unite. I'm going to fight you. We're going to fight over that. Because we live in a country where you're supposed to be able to think what you want and say what you want and argue divergent viewpoints, right? We're not going to unite around that craziness. And that's really what they want.
Well, it's interesting because in 2016, you were part of this, what I would call historic moment in campaign history, where Donald Trump on stage, you had that famous bust up, and then afterwards he called into Fox News and sort of was rather rude about you, to put it lightly. But you held him to account. You put a pretty tough question there towards him, and you've admitted yourself that you're on the right, you're on the center right. What's kind of isolated you from this, I don't know, woke kind of movement where you've gone to this journalistic world, yet you're able to hold your own side accountable?
Well, I almost think it's more of a classism thing. Like I said, I was raised a Democrat by 2 Democrats, but we were Catholic, so we had some more conservative leanings in some departments. And then, my college, my university was hard left. I mean, they all are, right? So it wasn't until I really got out in the corporate world that I started to see the other side. And the soulless lawyer in me was just like, what is the other side? And is it persuasive? Like, persuade me. You want me in your party? Persuade me, right? And for a while there, I flirted with the Republicans. Then I was like, no, I don't feel that either. I think I'm just an independent. I think I'm just going to make up my own mind on each of these issues that comes my way and each of the candidates that comes my way. And that's been much more authentic to who I am. But what I mean about classism is, now I got some dough because I've been out in the corporate world for all these years, and I've made some money. But my imprint as a human was made from years 0 to 25. And we were middle class. We didn't even know a doctor, never mind a senator or, somebody with importance and stature and connections. No one in my family, no one went to Harvard or Yale or Oxford or Cambridge. Nobody. My dad went to Manhattan College. My mom went to Syracuse. I went to Syracuse. I think it matters. I think that's one of the reasons why Roger Ailes used to hire people like me, like O'Reilly, who went to Marist, like Hannity, who didn't go to college. And part of the reasons we all did so well is because we came from that background. We naturally abhorred elitism. And I still have that in me. Even though I got all this dough, I don't care about this dough. I could lose this dough tomorrow. I'd still be me. I do care about my country. I care about the First Amendment. I care about the little guy being dunked on by the rich, elite, know-it-all, liberal university graduates who want to tell them they're living life the wrong way while, they live in their ivory towers. And so I just kind of think we're scrappier. I am certainly scrappier. I'm also Irish. And just more pugilistic, right? I'm ready to go. And I think that's true of a lot of people who are more working class, middle class. Like they're ready to fight these messages that they're less than.
Do you enjoy getting into these fights with these people?
Sometimes, some of them I like. You know, when someone says something really stupid, it's kind of fun. You can kind of feel the hair on the back of your neck rise up and you're like, let's go. But in general, I like fighting for what I believe in. I mean, that's really what got me off my couch over the past 2 years that I've had off. Kind of sat around and first I was like, I have nothing to do. I'm bored, right? I don't know what to do. And then finally I'm like, I guess I could go back and I should go back. Not really feeling COVID. I don't want to go out there and talk about the deaths every day and the misinformation's being put out. But then I saw like the attack on the First Amendment that we've been seeing in our country. And I was like, that's worth fighting for. My country, my ability to say what I want, and also fighting for people who can't speak up, people who are too afraid right now to say how they really feel because they're worried about getting fired. Well, I'm not going to get fired. I own the company. So I'm going to say what I want.
This idea of holding people to account, as I mentioned, you've done this to your own side, you've done this to the Democrats as well. Do you feel the media in general are about to completely reverse and hold Joe Biden to account as much as they did to Donald Trump in the last 4 years?
Hell no. They're definitely, I mean, the Washington Post changed its motto to democracy dies in darkness when Trump took office. And you just wait, it's going to be like, it's going to disappear. It's going to be like, oh, but the light came out. The light is now, so we're good, right? There's zero chance they're going to do to Biden what they've done to Trump. And to be fair, there's zero chance that Fox is going to cover Biden as defensively as they did Trump. This is one of my frustrations with cable news, why I feel like the digital world where I'm operating now is just more pure. Like you can choose the person you trust. You can choose a direct relationship with somebody as opposed to a network that has an agenda that pays their bills. But no, already there was an article out today by a guy named Joe Concha who writes for thehill.com. And his point about the first Biden presser was not only it wasn't even softball questions. It was more like T-ball questions. And the ball placed on the tee was an enormous plastic beach ball, right? Like they're going to give him a full pass and it's already begun.
Well, that's fascinating. And as I say, you know all these journalists, or you must have met and interacted with and had drinks with and things like that, and worked with many journalists in Washington and in New York. How does it work on a practical level in terms of the problems that we've been talking about? And what I mean by that is, let's say that you've got the vast majority of people in CNN or the Washington Post or the New York Times. They are on the Democrat side and they're willing to play that game. Do they coordinate with the Democrats? Do they go and have lunches and dinners and things like that? And how does it work on a practical level?
Well, yes. I mean, it's very chummy. They're all at the same book parties and down in Washington, the same sort of Georgetown cocktail parties. But I think it's more that starts it. And then it's more of a social shaming or social currency that gets reinforced. So you talk to people around the water cooler in your company and they all start with, Trump's horrible, isn't he? Oh God, can you believe what he just did? Did you see this tweet? And they're all like, oh, he's disgusting, racist, sexist, awful, whatever. And you're not going to be the only one who's like, what was sexist about that? Or like, why? I don't see the racism, because, the group is going to be like, oh, racist, another one. And that's happened in little pockets throughout the country and throughout the industry. And so even if there are dissenting voices, they are way too scared to speak up. In defense of Trump, forget about it. I mean, they're saying that you're a Klan member if you support Donald Trump. No one wants to say, well, I kind of like him, when they're told that. And so it just becomes self-reinforcing. Your boss hates Trump. Your colleagues hate him. Your neighbors on the Upper West Side, where I am, hate him. Your friends. And I think it's almost like maybe it's a brainwashing if you were on the other side, or it's just a reinforcement of how right you are by not surrounding yourself with any dissenters who say, I like him, and this is why I like him.
Well, as I said earlier, Trump was pretty rude to you on a personal level. And I know that many people said, obviously his comments were very sexist and misogynistic and everything like that. And yet you have sort of brushed them to one side. You sort of said you've forgiven President Trump for being rather rude. What kind of backlash have you had, perhaps even from colleagues that or people at rival networks, CNN and things like that, on a personal level? Have they sort of called you a gender traitor and things like that for refusing to condemn President Trump as the most evil man in history?
Well, just to take a step back, so I asked him that debate question, which was about his history with women. And what I was asking him was, this is what the Democrats are going to hit you with. How are you going to respond, right? It wasn't like you're a sexist pig. It was, this history you've had and these comments you've said are going to come back to haunt you when you run against the first female presidential nominee. So how are you going to handle it, right? That question would not have been a thing if Trump didn't make it a thing. It was a totally normal question. Like, here's how you're going to get, attacked. He made it a thing. The Democrats were like, she's on our team, right? Like, I think that's how they felt. Like, she's with us. We knew it all along, because I've had other battles with Republicans. And I was never on their team. And I'm not on the right's team either. You say I'm of the right. I'm more center right than I am center left. But I have a couple of issues on which I'm pretty firmly center left too. I could go either way. I'm a soulless lawyer, as I said. Right now, I feel like the country's moving to the left, and so I'm still where I've always been. And maybe that's becoming more right. That's kind of how it feels. But anyway, I didn't enjoy what he did to me, and it wasn't easy to report on him fairly for those 9 months. He continuously attacked me, and I had security and all the nonsense. But I did cover him fairly. Sometimes I defended him, and sometimes I went after him. And it was my greatest mission professionally every night to make sure I didn't overcompensate for what were then my personal feelings one way or the other. And I did it. But over time, it became a nothing. Now, at the end of those 9 months, I decided to put an end to it myself. So I went to Trump Tower to tell him, you got to knock this off. Like, you got to put me back on the sidelines. I don't want to be on the field with you. You be on the field with Hillary Clinton. I'm going to be over here covering you like a journalist should. And he was great about it. And that's when the left lost me, right? When I lost them, where they were like, that is unforgivable. You gave in. And I was never in a battle. I was getting attacked, trying to avoid this whole thing. I was not on your side. I was not trying to take him down. I was not in a battle. And they couldn't get over it. They just couldn't. And then I released a book, and it had some stories about what Trump had done and what had happened in my life. Anger. Why didn't you publish it before the election? You could have brought him down. Well, that's not my job. It's not my job to bring him down. It's not your job, by the way, journalists out there, to bring him down either. It was my personal story, and I told it when I thought it was appropriate to tell it. Then flash forward to now. He's running. Trump is very controversial. I see that. I don't like everything the guy does. But I like a lot of the things he does, like the positions he pushes. No one's perfect. There hasn't been one candidate who I've thought, amazing, I love them all. So he comes out, he does the first debate. I say, he's too aggressive. The suburban women are not going to like that. And the old people are not going to like that. And those are the groups he needs help with. So he lost. Nothing. Second debate. He did very well. He was controlled. He was measured. I thought he beat Joe Biden. I said, I think he won. Traitor! Traitor! How could you? He attacked you for 9 months. What kind of where's your self-respect? Like, I can't even try to fight these battles anymore. They're so blinded by their Trump derangement syndrome, their hatred for him, and just their inability to see that journalism isn't about the journalist. It's about the story. It's about the facts. It's about what you're covering. And you need to check your personal beliefs when you get to the studio door.
So have you, on a personal level, have you fallen out with any of these anchors and, I don't know, Chris Cuomo and all these people? Do you ever have a sort of personal backlash where you've lost friends and things like that?
No, I mean, I haven't lost anybody who was a friend. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not friendly with Chris Cuomo, and I never was. I just don't, I'm sure he's a fine person, but I don't respect his journalism, and that's just the way I feel. So I'm entitled to my opinion too. The only friends I'd say I've lost over the past couple of years are the people at Fox who won't forgive me for not supporting Roger Ailes before he went down in, the precursor to the Me Too movement. There are some people there who, even knowing what he was now, just can't forgive me for not supporting him. So it makes me sad, but there's nothing I can do about it. And I wouldn't change my decisions either. So, it's one of those things you just got to accept.
I do want to talk about Fox in a bit of detail in a moment. But just before we do that, would you ever consider going back to a mainstream company, a broadcaster?
I don't think so. I can't see a role that would be attractive to me. I think I need to own anything I'm connected to from this point forward. I'm at a place in my career where I can't be told what to do. I just can't. It's not going to work out well. And so I don't know. I mean, if there's something I can own and I can control the messaging and I can do some good for journalism, I wouldn't rule that out. I'm not looking at anything like that, but I like where I am. And I really do believe the future is digital. That's where all like the kids are. And it's a totally different forum. It's so much more relevant to be able to have conversations like you and I are, long form, in depth. You can learn a lot. You can press someone's positions versus cable, where you can do 3-minute interviews and then you got to move on to the next story. It's just not fulfilling. You never feel sated, right? In a conversation or a topic, you don't learn much. And so I'm loving the new forum. And I do think, having looked at this for a while now, like, where should I place my next bet? This is the place, digital, online.
Do you feel unleashed?
Totally. I am untethered and unafraid. And I love it. This is the obvious next phase for me. What am I going to do? Like, I just feel like, what boss am I going to work for? First of all, I'll be terrified that I'd Me Too them out of the office, which I wouldn't. But I'm just saying, like, it's not right for me at this point. No one's going to tell me how to cover the news. Who would I respect enough to listen to? None. Right? I got to do it my way. And the viewers and the listeners will come or they won't. But for the ones who come, it will be a really authentic connection because they're there because they do trust me. So each one of those you really have to earn. And I think on the flip side, they're really hard to unearn, right? Like they're hard to lose because they listen to you in a forum like this. They really do get to know you. So the relationship is real. Anyway, that's where I feel. That's how I feel today. We'll see where life takes me.
Now you say the kids, they're all at the Joe Rogans and the Ben Shapiro shows. Are you watching and listening to those kind of podcasts rather than Fox News now? Is that where you and your family are at? Are you had enough of cable television? You're all on the intellectual dark web now.
Well, thankfully my kids don't consume the news really much at all. They're little. So I'd like to spare them from that. I think whenever I meet somebody who's like, I never listen to the news, I'm like, oh, that's why you're such a happy person. For me, it's a compunction. I must, but I wouldn't be sad if I didn't have this thing. No, I haven't watched cable news. I watched it on like the debate nights where you kind of have to watch that live. And I wanted to see what the news anchors were saying because I was going to talk about that on my pod the next day. But I haven't watched cable news to consume news really since I left. And honestly, not to toot my own horn, but I don't see a show that was like mine. The Kelly File was dynamic and exciting and fair and you learned, but fun. And I don't see that out there right now.
What do you make of, just on a very specific point here, but in the UK, I've just found this chap absolutely fascinating and you know him on a personal level, I'm sure. But the rise of Tucker Carlson, I mean, he's the most popular cable news presenter in history now, I believe. At least he was during the election. What do you make of the extraordinary rise of this guy?
Well, I love Tucker, and I recommended him for that position when I was leaving Fox. I knew he would be a star, and he was wasting away on weekend Fox and Friends, and it was completely beneath what he was capable of, right? And I'm totally rooting for him. I think he takes so much incoming and is still standing, which people respect. And yes, he's provocative and he doesn't tackle every delicate subject with, in a ginger way. But I think I'm fine with that. Like I can listen to tough talk, blunt talk that's not softened with, 40,000 qualifiers. And I think other people can too. That's why he's doing so well. So I think, when no one will stand up to the angry mob and you have someone like Tucker who will, you feel a real connection to them. I feel it too, just as a news consumer. So I admire him for taking the heat, and I don't believe all the awful things people say about him. I think they're just trying to demonize him to shut him up because he's a threat, because he's good at what he does.
Perhaps both of you see yourselves as anti-establishment, anti-elite people with huge platforms. I don't know. There's a bit of a similarity there, perhaps.
I think so. I mean, unlike me, Tucker does come from a wealthy family, but he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that chip. If anything, he's more like me. You know, he's the guy who used to wear the bow ties when he hosted Crossfire on CNN. That Tucker, I don't know that Tucker. I only know this version, who's like a fighter, who doesn't like elitism or elites, who totally gets like the thinking of flyover country. And he did before Donald Trump was it's not like he converted to Trump when he saw Trump win. When Trump was not in the lead at all in that contest, he was sort of channeling why people liked him in a way that was dead on. So he comes by it honestly, however he comes by it.
Do you think President Trump will launch his own alternative to Fox News? And should he do that?
I mean, I don't know if it's going to be a TV show or a digital show with just Trump. I mean, if you have Trump TV, there's only so much Trump that can be on television in a day. Because with all due respect to the other Trumps, there's only one Donald Trump Sr. That's the ratings magnet. So I just don't know. I could see Trump maybe taking his rallies on the road and charging money for the tickets, doing something to keep himself out there because he feeds off of attention. You know, he always has. I don't see him losing that in his late 70s. I just don't know about the channel, though. I think he's smart when it comes to TV in particular, and he's going to know that maybe people listen to him, Don Jr. Ivanka doesn't want to be on TV. Rupert tried to hire her many times, and she said no. So it's like, that's not enough Trump to fill 24 hours.
Let's talk about the opposite side of things on the media. When I say CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, what's the first word that pops into your head?
Biased. Biased. That's what they are, and dishonest about it. But one of the things I kind of like about MSNBC is they own who they are. That's their motto. This is who we are. Well, good for them. It's kind of like the Sean Hannity motto. You know he's right. It's kind of clever if you think about it. What I don't like is the dishonest ones. I don't like CNN trying to tell me that Anderson Cooper doesn't have it in for Trump. He does. And I like Anderson, but he does. Why can't you just be honest? He's an opinion guy now. That's okay. It happens. They just want sort of the imprimatur of big J journalism over every single one of their anchors, even though they're just as opinionated as Sean Hannity, just as opinionated in their journalism. So that's one thing. The New York Times is almost unreadable now. They're woke. They did bow to the resistance journalists inside their ranks. And I find the paper almost unreadable and insufferable. Having said that, I do like The Daily. If we're talking about pods with Michael Barbaro. Sure, it leans left, but he's smart and he does a good interview and I like it. So I don't know. There's very little to consume if you're someone like me who is more center, right? Whether you want to say left or right, I'm definitely more center than your average news anchor. And there's very few people left to root for, very few people left to trust.
Let's talk about the First Amendment. Do you think there's been a sort of split at least in the journalistic world, perhaps this has gone into the political world as well, where you've got those who basically support the First Amendment, support free speech, and then you've got the woke types who are sort of say, you can't say that because it's hate speech, you can't say that because I'm offended, or I think it's racism, or I think it's homophobia, or whatever. Is there this sort of growing divide within journalism between, you've got the wokies, and then you've got the people who, we're all about free speech?
I don't even know if it's just within journalism. I think in the country, it's between this 15% loud group on the far left and the rest of us, 85%, who are like, what are you saying? But sadly, most journalists are in that 15%. So they're overrepresented in the media and in Hollywood for that matter. so that you want, and sports now, ESPN and, the NFL, like this wokeness thing is happening amongst people with very big platforms, which makes regular people think it's bigger and more endorsed than it is. I am almost a First Amendment absolutist. I will fight to preserve the First Amendment to my dying day. It's worth fighting for. And in this, one of the things that makes us special is the First Amendment, that you have a right to say how you feel. The press should be free. And hate speech is totally constitutional. And that's how it should stay. If you want to say something hateful, it's not very nice, but you have a constitutional right to do it. And that's one of the things that makes America great. That we're not some crazy fascist dictatorship where somebody controls your thoughts and your words. There's a growing movement. I think I saw a poll that said the majority of college students now in America want a constitutional amendment that would ban hate speech. Are they stupid? I think that they've gotten stupid at Harvard, because the First Amendment is there not to protect speech you like, but speech you do not like. That's why it's necessary. You don't have to protect speech that says puppies are wonderful. Like, come on, educate yourself. And what would the country be like if it were otherwise, right? Like, who's going to decide what's okay to say? Because right now, they've got the microphone, but things shift around. And what if there's some woke culture that develops on the far right that says you can't talk about abortion in the way you want, right? Like, you can't talk about gay marriage anymore, right? Like, we were in that place for a while and they didn't seem to like it. So I really think we need to get to a place where we just stop with the nonstop sanctimonious judgment of one another and realize that the only way you can abandon your perpetual victimhood and get tough and gritty, as one must to succeed in life, is to allow divergent viewpoints, beings, conversations, statements, jobs, choices in life. And while you may not like it, try to understand it and then move on.
Well, the First Amendment is a wonderful thing. And for example, in the UK and Scotland, they passed a law recently which regulates hate speech within your own home. So if you say something that's offensive, according to the Scottish government, the police can come and arrest you in your own home and, you'll have to go to prison for that. So it's scary stuff. And in other countries, we don't quite have that same.
Well, a little bit. I mean, you're seeing it, saw it in Canada with you're mandated to say someone's pronouns of choice. That's why people think Jordan Peterson is a homophobe or transphobe, because he said that's crazy. Why would you be passing a law that makes it wouldn't be very nice not to use it, but why should I be forced to use someone's chosen pronoun? And here in New York City, if you say illegal immigrant in a way that's meant to disparage, you're breaking the law. And they're coming out with pronoun laws too. It's insane. If I want to be a bad person, I should be allowed to be a bad person. Like, I'm sorry, but that's American. There's only such slivers of limited exceptions to that right in our Constitution. Hate speech is not one of them, but speech that it will immediately incite violence. That's why yelling like fire in a crowded theater, like immediate injuries likely to follow. Very limited avenues that you can't say, but they need to stay limited, because do you really want the government deciding what's appropriate? I don't. I certainly don't want Mayor de Blasio here in New York telling me what I can and cannot say. That guy can't even tie his shoelaces.
Are you worried yourself about being cancelled? I mean, obviously you've got this new podcast, which is doing very well. Are you worried about the backlash that you're going to have, and maybe Apple or someone could say one day to you, and we're no longer going to allow you on our platform?
No, because I'm not, I'm strong and I'm provocative, but I'm not that much of a firebrand. I mean, there are people way more provocative than I am on those platforms right now. So it would be pretty outrageous to put me in the crosshairs from a platform like that. But even if the worst happened and that happened, I would just go direct to consumer. I'm good. Like, I would just launch my own platform. I can just do it at megynkelly.com and charge people a small fee to listen to me if they want to, and I'll have the relationship that way. I'm uncancelable, and I love it. And even on my pod, I said to my team, only get me advertisers who have a steely spine. I don't want anybody who's going to roll over as soon as Sleeping Giants calls them up and says they're offended again, right? They're offended by everything. So I have a lot of veteran-owned companies and companies owned by moms. Veterans and mothers have a ton in common. They're tough. They've both been through war. And they know a real controversy when they see it. You know, it's like these guys, especially the veterans, they risk their lives to protect the First Amendment. They're not prone to shut it down just because somebody's upset. Someone got their feelings hurt. So no, I'm not worried about that anymore. It's one of the joys of being outside of, you know, legacy media.
Let's finish the interview by talking briefly about President Trump's legacy. How would you describe it in a few sentences? What would you say is his legacy?
Well, I'm not going to take credit for this. I'm going to give credit to Dave Rubin, who I think is the one who said this, but I thought it nailed it. That what they hate most about President Trump is that he showed half the country how to fight. I think that's really true. Whereas Republicans like Mitt Romney and even John McCain, they looked like they were straight out of central casting for Republican president, but they couldn't get the ball over the finish line. And Trump didn't look like he was straight out of central casting and didn't sound like he was, but he got the ball across. Well, why is that? In part because he didn't sound like that. In part because he had said controversial things, because he didn't give a flying fig who said what about him. He was going to say what he felt. In part because no matter how many times he said, you know, the media isn't the enemy of the people, and everybody said, you shouldn't say that, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. He kept saying it. And eventually they outed themselves as at least his enemy and the enemy of half the people in this country whom they disdain. I think that's what he's done, is he's fought battles no one else would fight, and he's won most of them. And in doing so, he's exposed truth that was always there for the taking, but that wasn't seen. And I think he's left a lesson for others that sometimes you should distrust authority. Sometimes you should kick the tires. And sometimes it's not the time to unite. Sometimes fighting is a better option.
In that sense, do you see a part of President Trump within you?
Wow. I don't know. That's a bridge too far. I don't have much in common
You're
with
both
him.
fighters, aren't you? I mean, you know, you talk about being anti-establishment, anti-elite.
Yes, but I will confess, I am more, I believe in decorum. I do believe more in kindness. I think you can fight and be kind and have kindness as your default. I think Trump is too thin-skinned. You know, he fights all the time. He doesn't have to fight every fight, and he doesn't have to be so personally disparaging when he does it. You know, I don't like hearing, I'm not a Kamala Harris booster, but I don't want to hear him call her a monster. You know, stuff like that. Like, you know, as a human, I want more, right? I want more from someone in that role in particular. That's why I'm resisting your, but certainly when it comes to our pugilistic natures, like just the need to be in there, the need to be swinging, the need to take people on. Yes. And I think what's happened to me over the past year is the more I see people being silenced, the more I need to get out. I need to get out there. I must, you know, it'd be very easy for me to just spend the next 10 years on my couch or going out to lunch. There's a whole crew who like does lunch and does tennis. Doesn't sound so bad. I just can't do it. I can't, you know, it's just, I'm not built that way. I've got to get out there. I have to say the things that nobody else is saying. I know it gives people at home the same feeling I had on my couch when I heard people like Tucker or Piers Morgan. I love when he says all the crazy stuff. So I'm like, some I disagree with, some I agree with, but I'm like, yes, go Piers usually. I want to give people that same feeling. So if I have that in common with President Trump, then good on me.
And just one final question. This subject is fascinating to me. And you mentioned Mitt Romney there and sort of establishment Republicans, pre-Trump Republicans, and the impact that Trump has had on that party. He's obviously been a great disruptor. You've been a great disruptor in the media as well. What has Donald Trump done to the Republican Party? How has he shaped, formed, changed the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, immigration comes to mind as one of the first things. The Republicans were about to roll over on immigration reform, and they were very much ready to at least have serious conversations about amnesty for the 12 million undocumented immigrants in the country right now, which the working class of America did not want. The elites wanted it. The Chamber of Commerce wanted it, but the working class did not want that. The middle class along the southern border did not want that. And I think the Republican Party has gotten that. They've gotten tougher on immigration and unlawful immigration, and they're probably going to stay tough. I think I'm pro-life. Trump has been really vocal, and he's been the most pro-life president we've seen in a generation, in 100 years. I guess that's too far because we only had it legalized as of 1970. And I think Republicans may get bolder when it comes to that. I also kind of just think when it comes to the media, Trump ran right over them and created his own avenue directly to the people, his Twitter feed, just whatever he goes on television, people watch, he knows how to make news. And that's a new lesson for the Republicans too, because the press hates Republicans. It just does. And they need a direct means of communication because Fox News can't do it all, right? You got to reach Republicans who aren't necessarily watching Fox, people who want to know the truth, but don't necessarily tune in. I mean, Fox News it's successful, but the average viewer is if you get a great show one night, it's 4 million on a show. Well, the country's got over 300 million people in it, so you need more. So I think he's taught them, create the direct line of communication. You don't necessarily need the media. If you're a person of prominence, a senator, a governor, a president, even a congresswoman, look what AOC is doing over here. You can skip them, skip the middleman, go directly to the people.
Thank you so much, Megyn, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.